Three? Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, with Diablo 4 now being out for a few days, the vast majority of people playing so far are either just entering World Tier 3 or have been there for a few levels now, actually. At this point, this is when you start to really care about what your build is, when having a nice amount of synergy on your character will really start to make a difference as far as your proper effectiveness. Up until this point, you can easily get away with only one or two legendaries just sort of functioning together decently with one little synergy, but in World Tier 3, if you want to feel truly powerful, you will need a whole stock of them, in the vast majority of your slots, if not just all of them, ideally of course. That said, what do you need to know about legendaries when it comes to World Tier 3? Does anything change at all with them? And how do you get as many as possible in the shortest amount of time? Well, the first thing to talk about here is the concept of sacred legendaries. In World Tier 3, every item has a chance to drop as sacred. It gets a little golden border around the item in your inventory, and what this effectively means is that this item has a far higher item level than it normally would. If an average level 50 item is 550 item power or so, a sacred one can roll even as high as, say, 720, as an example of the highest ones I've seen. The idea behind this is that these are essentially just pieces of equipment that have the power level of something that could be all the way up to level 70, but a significantly reduced actual level requirement. So you could use a piece of gear that is level 70 power at level 50. These pieces of gear are very important, and they are how you will get significantly stronger through World Tier 3 content. Then on top of that, there is the concept of sacred legendaries. These are sacred items with legendary effects, but on top of a sacred legendary rolling at a higher item level and thus having better base stats, this actually also affects the legendary aspect that is on it as well. This only applies if you find it in the wild like this. If you were to apply a regular legendary aspect that you extracted, or even one from a dungeon completion in your Codex of Power, to an item that is already sacred, then the item text would label it as a sacred legendary, but the effect would not be enhanced in the same way. An easy way to show this in action is this ring. This is a base legendary Ursine Horror ring. You can see its damage effect potential roll, whereas this is the sacred legendary version. It dropped as a sacred legendary, which means that it's more effective, and it has a much higher damage range to show you this as a result. You can even see the difference when you extract items by looking in your inventory screen. If an aspect has a golden symbol, that means that what you extracted was actually the sacred version of that legendary aspect. All that said, your first goal as far as legendaries go upon hitting World Tier 3 is to get any legendaries relevant to your build, just in the first place. They don't need to be sacred. Your second goal, once you have all of that, is to make it so each of those legendary effects is on a sacred legendary piece instead of just a regular one. This will give you a significant power boost. So in this video from here, I will be going over the best activities for getting both regular legendaries and sacred legendaries in World Tier 3, and now that you understand why you would want each one. Generally speaking, any activity that gives legendaries as a base will also be able to give you sacred legendaries. They just have a much lower drop chance from the same rolls. But there is one particular activity that you can do in World Tier 3 that specifically drops sacred legendaries out the wazoo, and I'll get to that later. First up, of course, though, are loot caves. This is more of a general concept than an actual activity. It's not something necessarily intended by the developers, but there are certain areas and dungeons that just have a particularly high density of high quality mobs that lets you farm them for quick legendary drops and great experience. An example of these, the current best one, is the Champion's Demise dungeon in the Dry Steppes region. The first step of this quest sends you down 3 sort of lanes full of enemies. Just drag them all together, kill them in a big group real quickly, do that for each of the 3 lanes, then hit the exit dungeon button on your map, log out, log back in, then go back in the dungeon and repeat. What this does is create a really efficient loop of killing a lot of enemies, including a number of elites, really quickly, and killing elites is a great way to farm legendaries. Also, yeah, really good experience too. As far as the actual intended mechanical systems that Blizzard wants you to do, though, you have a few options. One of these is the Whispers of the Dead. This is where you complete the various red objectives on your map until you've amassed 10 grim favors, bring them back to the Tree of Whispers, and it will offer you a cache. These caches often have legendaries for specific slots, sometimes even sacred legendaries can come from them, and this can be a really good way to get these things, but it doesn't very often drop higher tier sacred legendary items. It's more just good for earlier drops from World Tier 3, like filling out your legendaries in the first place. Instead, what I would recommend doing is just sort of completing this as a background bonus while you are doing other things, things. For example, nightmare dungeons. You can do a nightmare dungeon that also happens to be the objective of a grim favor. Nightmare dungeons unlock in World Tier 3. You get sigils for this first from the Whispers of the Dead itself, and once you have sigils, they sort of drop more sigils in the dungeon, so you can keep going from dungeon to dungeon, no problem. Simply activate a sigil from your inventory, then head to the dungeon that it shows you, and even on Tier 1, which is essentially just level 53-ish enemies without much extra difficulty, Legendary and Sacred Legendary drop rate is actually really quite good. This is essentially the best non-timed way to farm these items in the game. I say non-timed because there are two ways that are technically better, but you simply cannot do them whenever you want to do them, just sitting around, decide to go. The true best time to Legendary ratio is from world bosses, specifically on your first kill of each world boss each week. The world boss itself will always drop a minimum of one Legendary, often Sacred, and then the cache that it gives you once a week has a number of further Legendaries, many of them also being Sacred. Sometimes even unique items too can drop from this, which are essentially just more powerful Legendaries that start to exist in World Tier 3. World bosses are by far the most efficient way to farm Sacred Legendaries and even uniques, but that only applies when a world boss exists for you to kill, which is like 3 times a day or so. And also, of course, once you have killed each of the world bosses once, you do have to wait up to a week before they drop this cache again. You just get the base drops, which are definitely still worth getting if you see a world boss spawn happening, so if you see it, go do it anyways.
Gotta go fast.
After that then is Helltide, and this is up about as often as it isn't. You'll get a notification in-game when a Helltide is beginning. If you open your map, you can clearly see when a Helltide is taking place as it turns massive sections of your map blood red that aren't normally that color by any means. This lasts for an hour from the time that it spawns, and if you go to this area, you will find above average strength enemies. I don't really recommend doing this until you hit at least level 53, and that's only if you have most of your legendary effects of your build and are just trying to upgrade to Sacred Legendaries. Otherwise, put this off a bit longer. The stronger that you are going into Helltide, the better that it is, the easier it is, and the more efficient it is too, so just don't come here too early. That said, enemies that you kill and events that you complete within a Helltide zone will drop a currency called Cinders. You lose a bunch when you die, and when the Helltide ends, you lose any that you haven't spent. We have a full video on Helltides on the channel with all the details that you could really want on the concept, but the quick summary is that within this zone, while active, there are chests all around the map. If you walk up to them, you can see a little text above them that says that it has a specific name, and it will also tell you the cost to open it. A two-handed weapon chest, for example, will cost 150 Cinders. Most armor or ring chests will cost 75. Then there is also a mystery chest that costs 175. Essentially what the names mean is that those are the items that will come from that chest. Open a ring chest and you will get rings, so on and so forth. From what I can tell though, this is the highest drop rate activity for Sacred Legendary items in World Tier 3. I did 3 Helltides recently, and every single chest that I opened bar 1 dropped at least 1 Sacred Legendary item, with some of them dropping 2 Sacred Legendaries, and the mystery chest even dropping 3 Sacred Legendaries. The main point being that this activity in general simply has the highest drop rate of specifically Sacred Legendaries that I found in World Tier 3, and you can do it consistently whenever the Helltide is available. It will take you on average about 5 to 10 minutes to get 75 Cinders, which is the cost of the cheaper chests. So obviously 1 Legendary in that time frame isn't a high number, but again, the fact that they have such a ridiculously high chance to be Sacred makes that worth it. Even past that, it actually lets you target specific slots for these Legendaries, which makes the time frame even better. Let's say that you want a Legendary effect that only drops on rings, amulets, gloves, and weapons. Open chests that have rings in them, and you have a much higher chance of getting that one specific aspect you want as a Sacred Legendary, because the pool it's pulling from is far lower than if you were just getting a random Legendary that could be for any slot. The same goes for unique items. A unique item can only be in one slot, so if the unique item that you're after is specifically a chest piece, then opening a Helltide cache for chest pieces gives you a far greater chance of having that unique drop than if you're just doing an activity that can give Legendaries at random just generally. Past that, there is also the Purveyor of Curiousities, the vendor for murmuring obols that you can find in every major town. Once you reach level 53, this vendor will gain an extra effect. You can purchase items for specific slots for a number of murmuring obols, but at level 53 and above, these purchase items will start to have a glow on some of them. If you hover over it, it labels them as Sacred Purchases. Which purchases have this glow will rotate occasionally throughout the day, but if you specifically buy from a Sacred slot with your obols, they can drop as Sacreds and have a higher chance of giving you better items. To show it here, I bought 17 helmets, 3 of them are Legendaries. That was a bit unlucky. Usually it's about a 20 to 25% chance of a Legendary from here, and of those 3, only 1 of them did drop as Sacred, but this is still a Sacred Legendary that I just straight up got from a vendor, no problem, which is just to show that this is another way to get these. And that's about it for now. We'll probably start talking more in depth about unique items and how best to get those in the coming days, but this was a nice chat about how legendaries and sacred legendaries are different from each other, and then how to get the most of each of these for your time spent as you round out of World Tier 2 and into World Tier 3. Of course, all of this could and probably will change by the time that we reach World Tier 4, and you sort of have to take this game in stages because of that, one bit at a time, at least if you want to have the best experience possible. I hope you've all enjoyed this video, and I hope it's helped you out in some way in your journey through Diablo 4. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.